All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the April edition of the Federation for Children with Special Needs Connecting Families. Tonight, the topic is getting on the road to housing. And the reason for that is because April is Fair Housing Month. And we're really, really excited to see a old colleague and friend in Cathy Boyle, who is the commissioner of the Winchester Housing Authority. This month, we're going to be talking with her in her role as the Housing Authority, and she has completed over 60 hours of housing counseling training through HUD-approved intermediaries. The recipient of 2 Margaret L. Bauman Awards for her work, Catherine also holds a certificate of graduate studies from UMass Boston in adapting curriculum and a certificate in ADRC, or the Aging and Disability Resource Center's options counseling from the Center of Aging and Disability Education and Research at Boston University School of Social Work. Autism Pathways works to educate families in Massachusetts about housing options for adults with developmental disabilities. Their mission is to enable Massachusetts residents with developmental disabilities and their families to find or create sustainable, supported, and self-directed housing that meets their needs and contributes to their quality of life. Getting on the road to housing will give families, teens, and young adults an overview and a roadmap, and maybe even a sandwich, on how to prepare for sustainable and supportive housing. So we are thrilled to welcome Cathy Boyle. Cathy, before we get started, I just wanted to mention to folks that if in fact you are in need of interpretation services, we will put a link for Wordly in the chat so that you would be able to access this workshop in your language of choice. It is also being recorded, so it will be available to people on the Federation's website as well. And we will have some time after Cathy's presentation for Q&A. All right, we won't hold you back anymore, Cathy. Please tell us all things housing. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing on behalf of our loved ones and their families.
Thank you very much, and I'm thrilled to be here. This presentation called Getting on the Road to Housing really is a taster presentation. It's 35,000-foot view of the whole housing process. And the presentation itself is actually pretty short, but it's one of those things that kind of rips the Band-Aid off and allows people to really get a lot of questions out there. We have other far more details, deep in the weeds presentations, but this is trying to give people a view of the whole process. And so without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And slideshow, come on. Okay. Okay, now. Okay, so it takes most families about 5 to 10 years to plan and execute a housing strategy for their adult family member with a disability. And you're going to need a roadmap, and we're going to bring a sandwich. So this is our roadmap. It is a 5 to 10 year timeline. We're going to talk about each of the 5 stops on the roadmap briefly here, and then in more depth on the subsequent slides. Our first stop is assessing skills and supports. And the primary reason that this is the first stop is because you can actually do it before the person turns 18. Most of the other things on here you can't do until after that. And so this is a matter of identifying the skills your family member has or can acquire, as well as those they will need help with or will need to have done for them. And I call these the 4 buckets. Your first bucket is the skills they have. Your second bucket is the skills they can acquire. The third is the one they will always need help with. And the fourth is the ones they will need to have done for them. So at this process, what we are doing is we are looking at sets of skills and saying, what bucket does this particular skill go in? Once the person is 18, it is possible to get them onto affordable and subsidized housing waiting lists in their own right. We'll talk a lot more about why that is really important, no matter who your child is. Our third stop is applying for all of the other government benefits that are possible, whether those are supportive services or cash benefits. And then at stop number 4, building skills, we are going back to our buckets and getting ready. So our goal here is to move as many things from bucket 2 to bucket 1 as possible. So acquire those skills and get them over into the, yep, that person's got the skills bucket. And developing services and supports for buckets 3 and 4. And I distinguish services and supports because services, may mean a person is helping somebody do something. Systems or services may mean somebody's helping them do something. Supports may be more broad than that. That might be anything from the use of technology to methods to help cue the person through something. And we'll talk more about that later. And then finally, stop number 5 is when the person moves in. We're going to generalize the skills and support systems to the new setting and add any additional services that are appropriate to the new setting. So again, our first stop is assessing skills and supports that the person will need to live as independently as possible. Even if a person is living in a licensed group home, they should be able to participate meaningfully in daily activities. My son is almost 33 years old, and he lives in a DDS licensed group home. And it is very important to him to help make breakfast, to help do the laundry, to help take the trash out. And to the degree to which he engages in those activities, he has less idle time on his hands to dream up less productive ways to entertain himself. And the assessment of skills can begin at any time, and the results can be put to good use right away. Even if your child is still pretty small, they can work on skill development, and this process should be well underway by adolescence and should be revisited on a regular basis. And if you go onto our website at this first link, you will get more information on stop number 1. Now, once someone is 18, they can get on housing waiting lists as an adult. And lists might be anywhere from 4 to 12 years. Let me correct that, 4 to 14 years long. So it makes sense to get on them as soon as possible. If your goal is for the person to be living outside the family home by age 30, you need to be getting on those lists at 18. Now, if you feel that might be too soon, consider these points. Even after your person gets housing, it may take 5 years for them to settle in and get all the kinks out to make sure everything is running smoothly. And you're probably going to be heavily involved in that process. And so the question is not how old is your child? The question is how old are you? And again, the link will get you more information on stop number 2. Now, there are many benefits that can be applied for as soon as the person turns 18. They can include cash benefits as well as funding for supportive services. Some examples are cash benefits such as SSI, SSDI, and EAEDC. Actually, EAEDC is really something that the person applies for once they have housing expenses. So put a little asterisk next to that one. Supportive services such as the Department of Developmental Services, Mass Rehabilitation Commission, and Mass Health. And Mass Health has specific entitlement programs to help pay for supports, including adult family care, adult foster care, and personal care attendant services. An entitlement program is something that if you qualify for it, you are entitled to it. There should not be caps on the number of people receiving it, and there should not be waiting lists. This slide basically is a 1-slide version of a 2-hour presentation. You can learn more about this at this link. So living skills, these are really critical to success in housing. And this applies to everybody, no matter what their level of proficiency is with different things, whether it's taking a shower, taking out the garbage, or taking bank statements to a housing recertification meeting. Your family member is going to need skills, supports, and systems. I'll give you an example of this. This last week, my daughter, who has learning disabilities and has a housing voucher, she made an appointment and went to a meeting with the people at Volunteers in Tax Assistance, which she income qualifies for. And they were able to assist her with filing her taxes. So even though doing the actual filing of the taxes is not something she's able to do, she is able to do this process with the Volunteers in Tax Assistance. And it's a great idea for people to develop and practice their skills while they're waiting for housing, instead of trying to put it all together later. I like to say that we don't want to build the plane while flying it. Instead, we want to do a shakedown cruise. And again, we've got information on stop 4 at the link. And in stop number 5, we're going to reach the top of the housing list, and it's time to execute our plan. And steps here include requesting any needed reasonable accommodations for disability, contacting other players who may be involved, such as the Department of Developmental Services, to reassess what supports the person needs in the new setting. DDS may be saying, oh, your family member is living with you. We think they need 5 hours a week of support. And they move into a setting on their own, and DDS goes, more like 15 hours. So you want to make sure that you do that. If you're using AFC or PCA, you need to reassess supports in the new setting. You cannot be an adult family care member provider for your family member if they're living in a separate unit from you. You might have to switch to adult foster care. Another thing is that if you want to use a housing voucher with an accessory dwelling unit, you're going to need to talk to your local building department to figure out what you need to do there. Again, this is the time to generalize the skills and the supportive services and the systems to the new location. And you may also find your family member needs additional supports, and you need to put more in place. That's at stop number 5. I recognize we are moving really fast here, but I want us to have most of the hour to talk. Okay. Now, let's talk about our sandwich. We can think about supported housing as a sandwich, and this sandwich applies whether it's somebody like my son who's living in a licensed group home, or someone like my daughter who is living on her own in an apartment with a voucher. So our bottom bun, in this case, our sandwich is a hamburger. Our bottom bun is the affordable or subsidized housing voucher. And that subsidy might be attached to a specific housing unit, or it might be a portable voucher. My son lives in a group home and he has a Section 8 voucher. So even if your person is going to need 24/7 support, a housing voucher can still be appropriate. Similarly, even if your family member is not someone who's going to qualify for 24/7 support, such as a group home, there are still ways to use the voucher. In the last slide, I mentioned an accessory dwelling unit. Consider a situation where you convert your garage to a studio apartment and your family member uses the voucher to pay you rent. And that's, a big chunk of money is being paid to you directly by the local housing authority, and that's money that you can use to help pay for additional services for your family member. That is just one example. Now, if we move up in our burger, Our other government-funded services are the meat, and these can include services from DDS, from Mass Health. It can include federal benefits such as Social Security and SNAP. Even if your family member is still living with you, once they turn 22, they can apply for SNAP to create their own SNAP household within the family home. And now moving up, well, let's talk about the condiments. And the condiments are things you have to pay for out of pocket. And obviously you want to go light on this if you can. But if your family member needs additional support, you may need to pay for some of it. And this goes back to why building those skills is so important, because the more skills your person has, the less you're going to have to pay. For example, in terms of autism, the single greatest indicator of, in this particular study, it was called success in midlife, was daily living skills. It was not IQ, it was not level of education. It was the ability to take a shower, get dressed, get on the bus, etc. And in that particular study, they defined success as a combination of two factors. One was contentment and the other one was employment. And then our top bun on our sandwich is unpaid support from family and friends. So what you can see here is that to the extent that we can maximize our bottom bun and our burger, we don't have to lean as hard on the private pay or the unpaid support from family and friends. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about private pay and why it may be necessary. Sometimes people are successful in transition programs, but they fail to successfully transfer their skills to living independently or with roommates, and they continue to need additional support. And then the other thing that I have seen is people lose skills over time. People in their 50s may not have the same skills that they had in their 30s. There's a phenomenon called autistic burnout, and it's very real. I've seen it where people in their 30s are able to hold a job, they are able to drive, and by their 50s, they can't do it anymore. And it's very much a real thing. So you have to think of housing as a work in progress that can change over time. And when and how. For some people, it makes sense to work in a step-down fashion. So starting with very intensive supports and then moving down. An example of this might be a transition program, residential transition program. And then moving from there to a less expensive private group living situation. And there are a number of these out there: specialized housing, mainstay, TIL, Jewish Family and Children's Service. And the cost for these has a very wide range, ranging from $1,000 a month to $6,000 a month. But frequently a portable housing voucher can be used for the housing portion of this as opposed to the services, which can reduce the cost. Or in some situations, such as the one where, it caps out at $1,000 a month. The reason it caps out at $1,000 a month is because there's a project-based housing voucher connected with the unit. And then finally, there are a lot of people who love those kinds of private group living situations when they're in their 20s. And you know what? They're like everybody else. When they're 35, they're really tired of living with their 8 BFFs and they're sick of the drama and they want to live by themselves with their cat. This can be moving to independent living with private supports as needed, layered on top of public supports. And private supports frequently cost more per hour than DDS is willing to pay. An example is AANE's LifeNet. Built is on here, but last year Built actually finally got a contract from DDS. So some people are able to access Built services using their budget from DDS. And so I really want to open it up now and have us take the rest of the time to talk, because I know we put a lot of content out there very quickly.
And we do have a few questions that came in ahead of time that we can get started with, if that would be
Absolutely.
sure. So one of the question was, how do you vet the agency providing staff to service the young adults in the home that will be developed for them?
Well, um, that's in some ways is always the biggest challenge. And to some extent, it depends on who's paying for what, right? So if you are accessing supports through, a DDS licensed group home, then obviously, that agency has a contract with the state. You visit it ahead of time, and you get a feel for the fit. Sometimes some people and some agencies are not a good fit. But the reality is, given the staffing shortages we have these days, DDS is not offering you a buffet of places to choose from. But that being said, you always need to be aware of what is going on in your family member's life, and be prepared to be proactive. And that's where things like, filing a complaint with the Disabled Persons Protection Commission comes in. In shared living, which is another DDS funded model that is meant to support people who, have 24/7 needs. The support provider is selected by the family working with a shared living agency and with DDS. There will be criminal records checks done, etc. But you want to get to know this person, and does shared living, the reality is that shared living, the average duration of a shared living placement in Massachusetts is 3 years. So, and in traditional shared living, the person with a disability lives into the home of the caregiver. And guess what happens when the caregiver decides they're quitting? The person with a disability has to move. And so this speaks to the importance of that housing voucher, because if your family member can control a 2-bedroom unit with a housing voucher, when the caregiver quits, the caregiver has to move out.
Right.
That's why this voucher is so important. In terms of, less than 24/7 support, if you are working, for example, with a self-direction budget from DDS, you are the one who is doing the hiring. There is an entity that acts as a fiscal intermediary, but you are the one doing the hiring. Agency with choice is the other model, and that is going to involve, you work with a human services agency, and you work together to identify a person, but the person is working for that agency, not for you. You do have the right to turn around and say, I don't want this person working with my family member anymore. The reality is that it's hard, because all of these funding streams are, they don't pay enough. They don't. And the reality is that, if they're paying $18 an hour at Dunkin' Donuts, and somebody in a group home is making $17.50, most people would rather work at Dunkin' Donuts. So it's always a work in progress.
Yeah. The workforce crisis is real, and especially in the disability world, and one that we have to really continue to work on as a whole. But there is a reality to, the vision is one thing, making it happen is a whole nother labor of love, right? If a person is interested in accessing group housing, how does one actually do that? What is the process for finding that, and who do they reach out to?
Well, there's that distinction between what DDS is paying for and what private pay options exist. For somebody to have their housing paid for by DDS, they have to go through a prioritization process. And the way prioritization works is, first of all, the person has to have an intellectual disability. And secondly, DDS has to consider them to be not healthy or safe in the family home. And so they have a three-pronged test for this. The first is characteristics of the individual, which usually comes down to, is the person aggressive, self-injurious, has life-threatening pica? The second criteria that, you know, and if they tick those boxes, they're generally going to be priority one just based on their characteristics. The second criteria is the ability of the family to provide care. What does that look like? Mom's legally blinded, dad travels on work 5 days a week, for example. The third criteria is the judgment of the person from DDS doing the assessment. And what I tell people about this is they don't know what they don't know. So you need to make sure that they know about what challenges you're facing. They need to know dad has a heart condition. They need to know, you know, mom has PTSD from outbursts the family member has had. I talk about what I call the Cocoa Puff test. I have no idea if they even sell Cocoa Puffs anymore, but it's a cereal I ate when I was a kid, so I use it. You know, and the Cocoa Puff test is, if your kid kicked a hole in the wall at 2 a.m. because you ran out of Cocoa Puffs, DDS needs to know about it. So
now is not the time to have our usual trying to be positive and have everybody see this person in a positive light. Now is the time to talk about the reality of living with this individual in Technicolor and surround sound, which I don't know if that even exists anymore, but that's the way I kind of describe it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
And so that, and when you go through this assessment process, DDS is going to come up with one of three outcomes. Either the person is priority one, which means DDS is supposed to be working on getting them housing ASAP. Priority two, and priority one may be, you know, they may steer you towards a group home or towards shared living. Priority two means, yeah, we agree the person needs 24/7 support, but we still think they're healthy and safe in the family home. And the third category is not prioritized, which pretty much means they don't think the person needs 24/7 support. Now, in terms of some of these other housing options that are out there, you know, I mentioned some of the private pay ones before, you know, whether it's mainstay or specialized housing or, you know, JF and CS, et cetera. And there are links to some of the key, you know, the most well-known players in that regard on the Autism Housing Pathways website. And there are others out there, but those are the most well-known players. And a housing voucher can be useful in that situation. In some situations, people have been able to use some of their DDS self-direction budget in those situations, but it's really dependent on the situation, the provider, and the DDS area office. And part of that is because DDS is very concerned that people not be in congregate living situations. And so DDS has not really had a problem with some of the things that JF and CS and TIL has done, because it's like, okay, we've got 2 or 3 apartments in a large apartment building where we are supporting people. And so DDS sees that as very inclusive. On the other hand, for example, Mainstay has some houses that, you know, and specialized housing is similar. We've got 12 people with disability living in one house. And DDS considers that to be too institutional. Now, there's been some movement on this, and some people have been able to use their budget in some situations in some of these houses, but you cannot count on it. It's going to depend on your personal situation, on the area office, on the agency. And then there are other things that people can, it's not easy, but it is possible to put things together. So let's take an example. I'm going to actually, I will give you 2 different examples. First, I want you to example, consider we've got 3 friends and they have all been on the Section 8 waiting list. And they all qualify for adult family care. So when, they're not all going to get their vouchers at the same time, but, and they may need to find ways to use the voucher, like in that garage that the family has converted, until they all have a voucher.
Mhm.
And now they can go out together, get an adult foster care provider to live with them if they're all level 1 AFC, and rent a 4-bedroom unit. The caregiver gets 3 stipends and free rent. And individuals may still be able to tap into additional supports from DDS. So that would be an example, and it's a really good example of why, we've all heard the expression, it takes a village. Your child is going to need a village, and you are not a village. If you think you're a village, you got to let go of that right now. You've got to build your village. You've got to find each other. And so that's one example. Another example I'm going to give is something I call fraternity group rush. And I call it that because I went to a college that had co-ed fraternities. And once in a while, you'd see a phenomenon where, the number of people affiliated with a fraternity had shrunk quite a bit. And a bunch of friends who were freshmen would decide to all join the same fraternity that year and essentially take it over. They became the future of the fraternity. And so that phrase has stuck with me. And what I call fraternity group rush is, we've got our group of friends again, and we all apply for apartments in the same building. We're not all going to get in at the same time, but eventually we will all get in. And, we will know each other. We can still interact with other people in the building. It is much easier if you've got 14 hours a week of support from DDS and your buddies do too. It's much easier to find somebody willing to fill those hours if they can put together a whole shift. And so those are examples.
Great, thank you. Now, going back to some of you had mentioned the 3 different possible outcomes of the DDS assessment. If a person is actually denied DDS supports, will they still qualify for housing assistance?
So in general, housing is separate from services. And this is actually considered to be best practice. It's a pain in the neck to navigate all the different moving parts, but it's still best practice. And the reason for that is, guess what? In a group home, you don't get to choose who your roommates are. And if you have a problem with the service agency, about the only way to change agencies is for the person to move. Mm-hmm. And so if our goal is for our family member to have a home and not a placement, it's actually a good thing to have that kind of separation. And housing in general is income-based. Housing assistance is income-based. Depending on the housing program, there are going to be different limits on income. So, for example, Section 8, I believe 75% of vouchers are set aside for people at 30% or below of median income. And with the other 25% can go up to 50% of median income. Whereas in state-funded site-based housing, it goes, the cutoff goes up to 80% of area median income. And this is where things start to get interesting, because I'm going to go back to the example of my daughter. She has a Section 8 voucher because her income is below 30% of area median income. She uses it to rent an apartment in an apartment building that has some market rate units and some units for 80% area median income. She's way below 80% of area median income, but because she's got that voucher, she can afford to live in one of those set-aside units. So she's living in an apartment we would all die for. I mean, she's living in one of these gleaming, brand new Avalon apartment buildings, right?
Yeah.
The market rate unit next door to her is $3,000 a month, but
Awesome.
and so that's, again, we go back to, if we had the three buddies who got their vouchers, they could apply to live in Avalon.
Right.
So.
Cool. All right, so we're going to take some questions from our audience. I have one in the chat, but before I pose that one, I just wanted to remind folks that as you're asking questions, please be really careful about not providing identifiable information about your loved one, because this is a recorded session. So I just wanted to make sure that people were mindful of that. We do have a question around any tips on how to hold DDS accountable. They have an issue with their particular loved one who can be explosive because of reactive attachment. They're adopted. And yet at age 20, they make promises but never follow through. He has DDS for autism only. DDS did mention HUD housing. Is getting a condo a good idea, and have DDS provide services?
Okay. The autism only thing is really, it's challenging because you don't have the intellectual disability. DDS is not going to pay for the housing. They're generally speaking not going to qualify for a group home. Do I know of maybe a double handful of instances statewide where with extreme behaviors, people have gotten into the group home system despite having a slightly higher IQ? Yeah, but it is rare. And those instances have generally gone all the way up to the commissioner. Now, but this, we go back to, housing being separate from services. And I want to specifically address the condo issue. One good thing about family owning the condo is that you're not going to evict your kid. Right? You're probably going to want to be, if your family member has explosive issues, you're probably going to want to be careful about what kind of building you buy into. And what the location of it is. You might want to make sure your family member is in an end unit. So maybe they only have one direct abutter or two direct abutters. And, ideally their bedroom is like not right next to somebody else's bedroom with just one wall in between. Okay, I see he's only explosive to us as parents. I've seen that before too. And so that's not as big an issue. And so again, the advantage of, the condo is it gives you a degree of control. Obviously, if you're going the condo route, what you're applying for is portable housing vouchers as opposed to site-based housing. This is probably a good place for me to mention. There's a lot of confusion about what kind of housing is available and how to apply for it. I'm actually going to steal the screen share again so I can just get to a chart. Hold on. Okay. So this is our website. You can see the roadmap is right there. But in the meantime, I'm trying to navigate to this finding housing. Okay, so this is our housing search and application grid. Can everyone see this? Elizabeth, can people see this?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. All right. And so on our top row, we have housing where the subsidy is attached to an address. The apartment itself is affordable or subsidized. And on the bottom row, we have the subsidy attached to a person. It's a voucher. You can think of a voucher as being like a coupon. You're not using it to rent Section 8 housing per se. You are using it to rent any apartment with a Section 8 voucher, for example. You can see that these things can be federally funded or state funded or privately funded. And the easiest way to keep these things straight is to remember who's paying for it. And they all have different application methods. You know, Section 8 is federally funded, it's portable. There is a Massachusetts rental voucher program, portable voucher. There is an alternative housing voucher program, portable voucher for adults with disabilities. You can see that this is color coded, and that's because it's a system. The gold is the Section 8. Blue is everything you can apply for using the CHAMP application, the Common Housing Application for Massachusetts Public Housing, or actually now it stands for Massachusetts Programs. And the purple is everything else. And I want to point out to you that we have a separate website. There are two Autism Housing Pathways websites. One is the Autism Housing Pathways website, and the other one is our specialty website on how to find housing called 18 Section 8. And this will walk you through how to do all of it with directions. If you start with other ways to apply for housing and follow the bouncing ball down here, it will walk you through it. In the document library, we have sample completed applications. We've got a checklist to help you refine where you want to apply to. We have a spreadsheet to help you check your to track your applications. And we have translations of all of this in our translations section in Arabic, Chinese, Haitian, Creole, Portuguese, Spanish, and Vietnamese.
Okay. Wow, that's an amazing abundance of information in one place. I love the language accessibility as well. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? I can imagine people are processing a great deal right now.
There's a lot there.
There is a lot there. Any questions? Shay.
Yes. Thank you so much, Catherine, for being here. My question is, can we apply for housing in different towns and cities at the same time? Is it legal?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
The way I like to tell people to think about housing applications is you're at the grocery store and you can't tell which checkout line is moving fastest. So you get in one line and you put your husband in another line and your kid in the third line. And whoever gets to the front first, you know. So basically, that chart I just showed you represented a strategy. So do the gold, the Section 8, do the blue, the CHAMP, and do 2 or 3 from the purple. The catch is that almost all housing waiting lists have local preference. So you can get on something, but the odds that they're going to take you if you don't already live or work in that town are very low. And people don't understand this enough. I glossed over it because I'm trying not to get too deep into the weeds, but the reality is there's more than one Section 8 waiting list. And most people, they make sure their family member is on the centralized waiting list and they think they've done Section 8. The centralized waiting list is a convenience for the 102 participating cities and towns. Guess how many cities and towns there are in Massachusetts? Over 350. So most people don't live in one of the 102. Because the way the centralized waiting list works is when one of those 102 has a voucher, they don't say who's next on the waiting list. They say who is the next resident of our town on the waiting list. And so the other main Section 8 waiting list is, everybody ready for a big mouthful? The EOHLC Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program waiting list. Okay. And that one covers all the cities and towns, not just the 102. And so it's very important to get on that list as well as the centralized waiting list. But guess what? Because it serves everybody, it's longer. So my son got on the centralized waiting list at 18, and he got on the EOHLC waiting list, then called DHCD waiting list, at 18. 6 years later, he got his voucher through the centralized waiting list because he lived in one of those cities and towns. But he was still on the waiting list for the other one because it's really kind of hard to take somebody off of that list. They just call you when you get to the top and you say, no, thank you. So in 2009, he got on that waiting list through Metro Housing Boston, and he got called in the summer of 2023. So what is very sad but quite common is I'll talk to somebody who says, my kid has been on the waiting list for 10 years on the centralized waiting list. And I ask them where they live, and they tell me, and it's not a town on the centralized waiting list. And then I ask them if they know about the EOHLC list, and they say, no, I don't know anything about it. And I have to tell them, you need to get on it, but it's going to now be another 10 to 14 years for you to get a voucher through that one. Now, all of this goes to why you need to do it as soon as they turn 18.
Right. Someone has asked if you would be willing to share your contact information, and if you would be willing to do that, we can put that in the chat.
Sure.
There's a question around adult child benefits when you have a parent who collects Social Security, how an adult child can get 50% of a parent's Social Security and 75% upon death instead of SSI, as more money, that makes more money actually available and possible for housing.
So basically what you're talking about is the disabled adult child benefit through Social Security. And the way that works is when a parent dies, retires, or becomes disabled, an adult child, disabled adult child, who is somebody who can show they have had a lifelong disability that began before the age of 22, then they can qualify for a benefit that is equal to 50% of the parent's benefit amount. And they can keep that until the parent dies, when it will go up to 75%. In terms of how to get it, if you are getting ready to retire and start to claim Social Security, you're going to get some kind of form from Social Security. And one of the questions on it is going to be, do you have a disabled adult child? And you're going to check that off. I'm not sure exactly how it works if you develop a disability yourself, or upon death, but, at a bare minimum, contacting the Social Security office would get that process started. The one thing about the disabled adult child benefit you have to be careful about is making sure that the adult child's earned income does not go too high. If their earned income starts to consistently go above what's called substantial gainful activity, which in this year is $1,550 a month, they could eventually work their way off the disabled adult child benefit. And this is a consideration because I see a lot of people who, maybe they've got their kid has $1,200 a month in disabled adult child, and their child is making $1,400 a month working. So they got $2,500 a month in income. Now they get offered a promotion at work. If they take it, it won't be instantaneous. There's a safety net there. But if they take it, eventually they could work their way up to the point where they lose the $1,100 in disabled adult child benefit. So unless you think that their earning potential will take them all the way up to the $2,500 they were making, and again, these are numbers I pulled out of the air, right? So But the point is, unless you think they can earn as much as they were getting before with a combination of earnings and the disabled adult child benefit, you might want to think twice about, is it that important that, that they work an extra 3 hours a week?
If you're thinking about going the condo route where the family's owning a house and hopefully would have a HUD voucher, approximately how long would it take to get a family member a portable voucher?
Well, that is either the centralized waiting list, which is running 4 to 12 years, depending on where you live, or the EOHLC list, which is running about 10 to 15 years, depending on where you live. And so this is why you get on it at 18. Okay. And if your child is, 30, get them on it immediately. Again, use the website to guide you through the process. The other thing in connection to that I want to mention in connection to, renting from family is it's a reasonable accommodation for disability. You have to request it. General rule of thumb, wait until they've already told you your kid has a voucher. And then in writing, send them an email saying we are requesting the following reasonable accommodation to rent from family. Okay, because if you put it in writing, they're not going to give you a tap dance. If you're just having a phone conversation, you frequently, oh, we don't do that, or there are all these reasons why we can't do that, or that's really not a good, put it in writing. And that problem will go away. The last thing I really want to make sure I put in a plug for is the home modification loan program.
Yes.
So the home modification loan program can be used towards the cost of putting on an accessory dwelling unit on your home. And it can be up to $50,000 with 0% interest, all payment deferred until title to the property changes. And so if you are, provided your local zoning permits it, you could convert your garage to a studio apartment. So let's run some numbers. You convert your garage to the studio apartment. Your kid has a voucher. Let's say the studio apartment payment standard for your town is $1,900 a month. Let's say your kid has $1,000 a month in income. Your kid pays you $300 a month. And then the housing authority pays you $1,600 a month. And that's money that you've got to pay for additional services, those condiments on the bun.
All right, we only have about 4 minutes left. So does anybody have a final question before we wrap up for the night? Going once. Going twice. All right. Wow, this has been incredibly informative. You're getting a lot of appreciation in the chat now, Kathy. So appreciate your coming out and sharing all of your expertise and all of the work that you've done on behalf of our loved ones and housing. It's amazing the road that you've paved for people in many ways, and how far we've come, and yet how far we have to go. Right, we still have a lot of work to go to together, don't we? But thank you so much. And as I said before, this recording will be uploaded to the Federation website so that you will have access to the presentation itself and of course all of the conversation.